Hey, what's up everybody? Rob here from Ramp Studio Comics. Welcome back. So I sent out a recent poll and I said, what do you guys want to see next? Do you want to see fan art fun? Do you want to see drawing videos? I can't remember the other things it said, but you guys said drawing videos unanimously. Basically, it was like 60% of the vote. I love doing those things because it really gives me an idea on what to do next because I never really know. I forget. You guys ask a lot of request videos and I try to get the ones that are fresh on the brain, and then some of them unfortunately get shoved to the back burner and then off into obscurity and forgetfulness, which is where I reside most of the time. So what I figured we could do today is just a bit of a rendering. So what I'm going to do is draw out a quick little arm pose here, and forgive me, my proportions are off as they usually are at the start. And let's go ahead and size that hand down a little bit. I always get mixed up on accurate proportions and comic book style, which I like to over accentuate the anatomy, obviously. So this is always fun to kind of do things like this that are really typical kind of shots, just a kind of side profile of a forearm and a fist, and practice rendering it, and maybe just a little bit up to the side of the arm, but not much. Just we'll stop it like right here. So what's neat about doing this is basically trying to figure out the weight of the muscle groups. Okay, so at first when you start drawing, I think, or at least if I can remember to when I first started drawing, one of the things I would do is I would do line art like this, and I would say, well, that looks like an arm, so I'm pretty much there. And I would maybe do a little bit of interior line work, but I wouldn't really know where to put the lines, and I would just kind of leave it at that. I'd clean up what's here. And then as you start progressing, you start wanting to render more and get more weight and more overall volume to the artwork. So what happens is after you figure out where the initial lines may or may not go, it's not like this has to be entirely accurate, but we'll try to make it somewhat. These muscles kind of shoot from over here, and I think some of them point to the back of the hand like this. Another one goes like this, and forgive me, I don't know the names. I know they're like flexus carpi and all this stuff, and whatever. I'm not going to get into the name of it right now, but I need to study that. But the main thing is that once you get a general idea of where these things go, you get the knuckles and the bones that come back and kind of converge to the middle somewhat. They kind of meet back here, and you start to get a little bit understanding where some of these placeholders go, and then you want to start rendering. So then what happens is you start to go, okay, what if I add like this big shadow here, and the shadow here, the shadow here, big one at the bottom like that. So we'll say that all this is kind of what I'm envisioning, right? And that's okay. Like, I think this is kind of the way I first started to shade, okay? Like, I just traced what was already there in the lines, and that will give you not so bad of a style. It'll get you something. It'll get you something that doesn't look so flat on the page, right? But then something that you start to realize, and I kind of started to do it in this first part right here. See that little bit of a wave right there? You start to realize that that's pretty prevalent, or pretty evident in lots of parts of the muscles in the body. Like, it's not so much just a rounded shape like that. In fact, it almost is never that rounded or that smooth. And oftentimes it looks a little bit more convincing if you put like a bump or a bend or something, just not something so even and smooth. So what'll happen is if you study from photos, you'll get a little bit of this, but then I think another level of it is when you start to get more confident in your style, you just start to imagine things a little bit differently, and you start to just kind of throw in these off shapes, and you're purposely making it look a little bit more organic and a little bit more free-flowing or random, I guess. So let me try to do that as because generally I'll sketch this out to find these shapes. Now another trick that I'll do with this is I will actually put a gray wash in here. So you've probably seen me do that in some of my videos if you watch the channel a lot. I'll actually paint some of the shadows in, and I do it kind of rough and quickly, because what happens is, again, it helps me to perceive that little bit of randomness that I'm looking for with the shadows. So then after I do that, I'll block in some of these shadows. I'm going to start off very crudely just to get the concepts in place. And then we'll refine it and talk about a little bit of rendering techniques as far as that goes. So another thing that happens here is you start to wonder, like, how much of the underneath of the arm you might see, okay? So as you start to shade this, you go, okay, well, where's my light source exactly? Now, from the way it is right now, you can tell the light source is on the top, and from the way that, you know, you got this thickness of shadow here, and you got a little bit of light hitting right there, you can kind of tell that it's, you know, it's hard to perceive. If we were to do this as a spherical kind of shape around it, the light's like right about here somewhere, pointing down, something like that. It's kind of hard to perceive, but so you're kind of guessing as far as that goes. And then what happens is you try to make sure that the shadows relate consistently to that. And another great way to convey depth with this, as far as shadows go, and you know, especially with the forearm, is any cross section. So in the forearm, a cross section is just a vein, right? So you got like a vein coming across here, for instance. Now the tricky part here is, like we said, the light source is up here. We'll just draw a little light bulb. Ding. Light bulb, right? So it's pointing down this way, something like this. And so what's going to happen is you're going to get a shadow on this side of the vein. And you're also going to get a little bit of separation, or absence of light, highlight, whatever you want to call it, that goes right through here. So this is kind of the easiest way to make it look like there's a vein there, okay? And this works with a lot of different things. I wanted to explain it in the way of a forearm and veins, but you have to start thinking of this in a lot of areas of your drawing. It's very helpful. It's amazingly helpful for comics. Like, so then what happens, you know, these are like the base. This is like the primitive way you would do an arm, right? And then you start to want to stylize it, and you want to say, well, I'm just going to add some more segmentation because I think segmentation looks cool, and I want my character to look tougher than the other characters. So I'm gonna, you know, over exaggerate his muscles and his rippedness, if that's even a word. You know, I'm just gonna really take it to town, right? So you start doing that. You start adding more veins, whatever floats your boat, whatever your style is, right? But each time you do this and you do that little separation, or again, that highlight, it starts to give it a more depthy kind of feel. And especially as we go to render this, you'll see it'll really start to stand out. So then you add some of these in the hand, because, you know, he's got veins in his arms. He's definitely got them in his hands because they're more evident in the hands naturally. So generally, if somebody's got some pretty veiny arms, their hands are even more veiny for the most part. And another thing that you want to try to do is really mix up your angles and your organic shapes. I don't think you want to use all of one, all the other, but this is really going to be based upon your style. So I can't really tell you how to make that decision, but I like to mix up little bits of organic and angular shapes, or smooth versus angular shapes throughout the anatomy. And I'm just getting kind of messy here. I recommend being very sketchy in the beginning, or sketching a lot in the beginning. Being sketchy sounds like you're a shady character. I didn't mean that, but try to be as honest of a comic illustrator as you can possibly be. Just be a good person. It goes a long ways, folks. Okay, so let's say that it's probably like, shut up. You're not here to tell us about life. You're here to tell us about drawing pictures. Sorry, got to mix a little bit of that life lesson stuff in there too. Okay, so, you know, I'm just going to keep adding a couple little veins here. The other thing about veins is try to, you see I've got them all kind of too straight, right? Like, they're all straight. It's like, it doesn't look realistic. The other thing about veins is they're kind of thick in some areas, so thicker and then thinned out. And then they actually, you know, bend around a bit. They don't just shoot straight across. Again, there's lots of ways to really do this. This is style choice. This is totally up to you how you want to do this. I'm going to keep it centrally focused on the lighting aspect of it. Now, the thing that looks most boring about this, and like I said, we're going to render this out, so it's going to look a lot cooler here in a minute, but the thing that looks pretty boring is this shape right here. So this is kind of what I was saying about in the beginning. You just go with these kind of boring shapes, but then as you start to progress, you start going, well, let me see if I can make this look a little bit more interesting. Something just looks too plain about the shape of this part of the arm. So what I'm going to do is come up, try to change the shape altogether, and just mix up a different kind of effect there. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but I'll tell you, it's like the more you do this, the more you realize that experimentation can just really help you find what you're looking for in your style choices. But if you settle on the first thing, then you get what you get, right? You're not gonna grow a whole lot, I don't think. But we'll say that that's good. Just something, I wanted to try something just a little different for that shape. So now what I'm gonna do is take this, I'll time lapse this next part just because I'm basically gonna do everything I just said. I'm gonna soft erase and redraw this, and you don't want to watch it in real time. I'm slow. So I'll reshade this and I'll add some little bits of rendering and cross hatching and see what we can make of this. So let's press on. Alright, so now I'll soft erase this and redraw over top. And what I'm looking for is to bring out these shapes of shadows. And you can see that this was a really bad sketch to start with. And I like doing that because it allows me to practice looking through the rough sketch and really trying to find the shapes I'm looking for. If you overly refine the sketch, then you tend to stop right there. So in this case, I'm looking for the shapes of shadows. I'm doing some line weight, but I'm really just trying to paint the picture in a little more detail to get it ready for rendering. I'm also going to do a 2-point lighting, which I think is a cool way to make an arm or whatever the subject is look more rounded. And it's a great way when the color is introduced to really shape that as well. Just adds another dynamic feel to it. So with the shapes of shadows, really experiment with those shapes and just don't go for basic traced objects of the shapes. Really look into it a bit further and try to practice. And again, really push the depth that you can create by adding these shapes of shadows to your forms. Okay, so now we're ready to render this, and I did a little bit here and there, but what I want to show you is that I basically established that there's going to be a 2-point lighting. That's what this area right here, here, and even right there is supposed to signify. So the only thing I tend to do, and this is really very subjective to whatever you think looks cool within your own style, but I tend to render those areas different. So I'm going to start with what I kind of started over here with the back of the hand. And whenever rendering, I just tend to think about it like, I like the lines that come off kind of thick to thin, so tapered. And then I think about it as basically trying to smooth out the shadow. So again, there's lots of ways to interpret this and to do whatever you think looks cool. This is just what I like to do. And you can go in any direction you want, really. But what I find that works best is just if you think about the fact that you're breaking up this line here into shadows. So for instance, you could go like this. Okay, that's going in that direction of it. Sometimes I'll do that one. I'm actually going to have to rotate the canvas. For me, it works a little bit better if I put it in the direction that I'm most comfortable with my hand. So the other way would be like this. So you start maybe with thicker lines this way, and then you can have them break down. So really, let me redo that. You can kind of picture it like if you started with a real heavy line here, make the brush a little larger, and then just slowly space them and make them thinner. So that's another popular method, and you'll combine that with cross hatching too, so you can bring the other lines in the other direction. And that's kind of what I'm going for right here. But if you notice, I did it a little bit more where the thick lines, the thicker part of the line is coming off that main part of the shadow. So I want to keep with that same effect. I just like to keep that consistency with whatever I'm doing. So I'm going to bring it this way. So again, I'm feathering that line, kind of redrawing it over top. Now I'm using a Cintiq, and I'm going to be doing some videos where I explain how to do this more with the Intuos tablets, because I know a lot of people struggle to get their lines the way they want there. But with the Cintiq, it's pretty much just like drawing on paper. You still want to get your pressure sensitivity just right based on whatever you're using, but we're not going to get into that in today's video. And then I might do a little bit of cross hatching, and generally I'll make the lines different when I cross hatch. So notice I'm using thinner lines right there. That's again just a preference. Again, I don't think there's rules whenever you do this stuff, because whatever looks cool at the end of the day, that's your style. That's whatever you want to see on the page. So I'm just going to use a little bit thinner lines there. Okay, so now we've got that in place. Now with the other part moving up, I want to think about this arm, this shape going like this. Okay, so if I was to perceive, I don't know what that noise was. My computer made a noise, folks. If I was to perceive, it would be something like that. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking about in my mind's eye when I'm rendering this out. So now there's lots of ways to do that, and again, this is based upon whatever you want to see, but I'm going to go ahead and render this direction at first. So I've got kind of this compound shape going around this part of the muscle. So I kind of want to use that, I guess, and move these lines around. So over here I'm going to, notice how I tried to create another line almost like this. Okay, and then on this side I'm going to bring it this way. Try something like this. I'm just kind of spitballing here, see what I come up with. And as I bring it together, I'm just going to get those smaller and do something like that. You know, I don't know if that works or not, but that's what I'm going to go with. And then maybe a couple at the edge like this, just for design. But the main thing is I want to make sure that they look a little bit different than the other lines. Maybe that looks a little too similar, but when I go back and ink, I can, you know, maybe beef up some of the thicknesses right here, whatever. You know, because part of it is, especially if you know you're going to be the one inking it, you're kind of just giving yourself cues to the next stage. I ink almost... Okay, that's enough. That was my little Bose speaker there making noises. Those things are cool, but apparently they have a mind of their own. Okay, so yeah, so if you're inking it yourself, you can give yourself cues to the work because, you know, it's going to be you inking it, right? And if you work with an inker long enough, they're going to know kind of where you're going with it as well. So there's comfort in that. And then I might do something like this, maybe bring a line that way, whatever. You know, just, again, just kind of trying different things here. And then you can try these little tiny abrupt lines as well. So you're just trying to round out that form, show a little bit more depth, and kind of just having fun with it. Just like that. And obviously the neat thing if you're, well, I'm not going to say just if you're working digitally, I was going to say that, but you can use a transparent tip, but you can do that in traditional as well. You just grab the electric eraser or your whiteout pen, and you can erase some of these lines back and create some neat little effects. I've been doing that more with my inking, where I'll draw some of these lines in and then I'll just quickly erase some back and get different, you know, effects that way. So yeah, for these little parts like that, I'll use those tiny little abrupt lines. But I do try to vary it up. I try to make sure that I'm not doing this kind of singular pass over the whole thing. Me personally, I think that looks boring. It gets too repetitive. So I want to have a little bit more creativity in my work, and I try to experiment where I can and mix things up. So even though these lines look kind of the same at this stage, I'll look for ways where I can maybe throw in, you know, a different crosshatch line or something just to change it up a bit. And notice I'm putting a little bit of curve to these too as I do this. I'm not making these completely straight up and down. And I really want to stress that weighted line because if you just do these tiny little boop, 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 you know, you might get something nice. But if they're too thin, like I'll see people kind of do this, it looks pretty boring. You know, you got to give a little bit more life to that that render line. And actually, I started to mess up as I was explaining that there. Imagine that. Again, maybe a line going across here. You know, another cool style is just where you take a bunch of them and you go this direction as well. So that's kind of a really neat look too. You can get a lot of depth pretty quickly with that as well. So you want to try and see what works for what you're after, whatever your idea is for the look that you want to achieve. And that's where experimentation is just so important, because there's so many different ways you could really explore this, and you know, until you experiment, you're not going to know. So, and one thing I will say about rendering that I find helpful, I'll render different things different ways. So almost like what I said about the 2-point lighting, I'm purposely trying to render the top of these areas a little bit differently than the bottom. I think it looks a little bit more professional when it's colored, or you know, maybe it's just my preference, but the same thing applies to when you're rendering, say, cloth material versus muscles versus brick. I try to make sure that everything in the scene has a little bit different texture. It doesn't have to be huge, but it reads a little bit better if you do that, in my opinion. So try that as well. And make sure to comment in the section below and tell me if there's a certain material you'd like to see rendered that you think would make for a good video, and we'll try to get that on the list. The other thing is you could take the tips of your shadows and break those off like this. I think it looks a tad better if you do. And last but not least, the line weight. So you want to really make sure that the line weight is going from thick to thin and just bouncing around. You just want to make sure that it's not one even line weight going around the whole thing. And just kind of keep picking at it and adding little bits and pieces here. So remember to try various studies of this, different parts of the body. If you get one you really like, print it out or save it, put it by your art table. I really recommend doing that, especially if it's, it can really save you a lot of time, because you could set it up there and go, okay, well, I like the way this arm and this shading came out. There's my reference. And, maybe your art desk table just looks crazy, but you know what? You got a lot of food for thought, a lot of visual reference. It's your own stuff, so it's great. It can really help you. It can be a huge time saver. One last thing I'll leave you with, and then we'll bring this video to a close, because I know it's awfully long. Just remember, too, that you can either erase back. So, digital, it's real easy. A lot of softwares, you can just make one of the brushes a translucent version of itself. But even in traditional art, you can just use a electric eraser or a whiteout pen, but also take advantage of the fact that you can create some pretty neat effects with your cross-hatching working back into the work. So for me, I felt like the shadow was coming up too high anyways. So maybe I just, take some of those lines and go back in the other direction. Sometimes it'll look awkward, and other times it'll look really cool. You just have to play around with it. I think more often than not, though, it looks pretty cool because it just adds another level of detail, essentially. And you could really play with the ways that you do that. You can push back some of the negative spaces in between the cross-hatching, like this. You can just grab an area like this over here and do some line breaks going back. All sorts of neat ways to kind of incorporate that. And then, another technique you could do too is you can put these tiny little bumps on the veins, so you can make those look raised a little bit more as well. Oop. That one was too high. I'm very picky about my little bumps there. Okay, so that's about it. I think that gives you enough food for thought and stuff to run with. So practice, have fun with it. As always, I appreciate the support of the channel. Please like and share the videos. More content is on the way. Keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.